this is just a very standard sort of apple tree. Pretty sure this one's on an M25 rootstock, but could just as easily be on its own roots. The apples and pears, you could treat these the same. So the first thing we're looking at is it a tip bearer or not? So we're looking at the tips and seeing if they're swollen. With these, some are a little bit swollen, but not too many. So it might be a partial tip bearer, which many are, but this one we're safe to reduce the tips on, okay, if we need to. We'll have a look at the general shape of the tree. Is it doing what we want? With these, we're trying to create almost like a bit of a goblet. So we're trying to keep the centers a bit low, because these are, like I said, on M25, so they could get over 20 foot if we let them. And we want to keep them so that we can actually pick them without having to use too much, ladders and things like that. So we will be taking like the leader out, the central highest branch quite often on these. So it's going to be a reduction, it's going to be a try and look at whether we want to replace the leader, and then we're also going to do our 3Ds. Now our 3Ds are dead bits, so we're looking around, have we got any dead bits? Yes. So we'll take that out, okay, and we're leaving a little collar on the branch like we saw on our theory part of this, where we're not cutting it flush because we don't want that decay to go in. We're leaving a little collar so that it heals over nicely. So dead bits, disease bits. Have we got any bits which have got canker? Any like they look like open wounds, like fissures? Any might be spotty branches, things like that. And let's say that I found a bit and I wasn't happy with that. I could then cut that bit off. So we're going to pick this candidate because this is going to come off anyway because it's a crossing, and we would just take that out. Now that's a little bit thick for these secateurs, so I've then got the option of, do I use my loppers or do I use my saw? Loppers would be quite good, but they could crush the branch, so I'm going to use my saw. So you see this saw, I just press the button, pull it out. When I'm putting it away, you see it stops it there. Press the button again, do that. The reason for that little stop there is to stop you trapping your fingers, cutting your fingers. Be careful with these, they are quite treacherous. And so let's say that we're going to take out this branch here because it's diseased and crossing. So what we wouldn't do is go straight to the base first when we're cutting anything that's significant, whether it's with secateurs or with a saw. We start up here first, and at the moment the tension's kind of in the wrong place for this one. I'm going to just bring that below that branch. So now it's a free branch, there's no weight, it's just its own weight on it. So I'm going to make a cut away from the base, say about here, underneath, about a third of the way through. That takes away what we call the compression. So that's the bit which can trap your saw in. And then we're going to come slightly towards the tip of the branch and work on the tension. So with a small branch, it's quite difficult to show. On a thick branch, we're sometimes dealing with stuff pencil thickness or bigger, but you're coming through from the top, sawing like that. And then what we will find is we'll get to a point, there we go, where it's created a little hinge for itself. And if I can pull it, there we go. And you can see it kind of, now it's hanging there like on a hinge. And then I can just keep sawing through. There we go. And that's that moved away. With these, are we leaving it for the mower, just throwing it out on the main path? Or let's make a pile and we can tidy it up. So make a pile just outside your...
It won't be cut again till September.
Oh, right, okay. So make a pile, we'll tidy it up afterwards here then. So that's that. Then we need to clean up this bit. And because there's hardly any weight on it, we can come to our base like we did with the one we did with the secateurs. And we can just, now sometimes it's quite difficult when it's very tight like this, the branch, so you won't be able to use the full blade, but you just cut through. There we go, and it's like kind of that clean cut there, like that. The other way you can do it, like we said, is with loppers. So if we find another candidate, that's kind of crossing inwards, that one there, a crossing branch, so we'll get rid of that. Let's say we could do that with secateurs, but let's just say we're going to do it with loppers. So we start higher up, take the weight out, then come tighter to it, and then there we go. So that's crossing branches. Now crossing branches are quite difficult to distinguish. It's easy to distinguish dead and dying ones. Crossing branches are more difficult. Damaged branches is the third D in your 3Ds. So if you found a branch that had been rubbing, that could potentially let in an infection, that had been snapped, then you would take that out as your third D. So dead, diseased, damaged, dying, yeah, all the Ds, okay? And then crossing branches we talked about. Now crossing branches are weird with fruit trees because they get laden with fruit, they get quite heavy. And so you have to try and determine what a crossing branch is. And so when we're looking here, we're thinking, what will this branch do under weight? Now there's a wire here, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But for instance, this one here, what would that do under weight? And you can get to the tip and just gently press down, see what it's going to do, and then see what its partners are going to do. And you see there's potentially a crossing here where this would rub on that one there. Now, I've got to make the decision now, do I take that one out or do I take that one out? I'd be tempted to take that one out because it would just free up the airflow a bit through here. So I'm going to then get my secateurs in a second. So we're looking there. I probably can leave that one on, at least for this year. So I just come there, prune that there, and then that one's done. So that's how to sort of determine whether one's a crossing or not. So when you're quite often pulling these down, you're thinking at one point, oh, that might be a cross, that's about to cross. When you actually pull the weight on that and the weight on there, it might not, but that one we can see is. However, the temptation might be on this is to, I don't know if you can see here if I come around this way, temptation might be to cut this one, but this is quite a nice bit of growth. And actually that one's kind of growing inward a bit. So what I'd actually be tempted to do is to remove this branch here, because also because the prevailing wind, it's sort of growing a little bit lopsided. So again, always start with the saw and work your way down. So I would tend to go around with a saw first and then go around with my secateurs or loppers after. And so I'm going to take this whole one out down to about this fork here. So I'm going to cut a bit, I could cut a bit higher up first, but let's just lopper it for the moment. And this is where I might want my helmet, but I'm going to do that and just get that out of the way. And now I'm going to finish it off with a saw because it's a bit too thick for secateurs. Loppers won't really get, I can't get the angle in there. So I'm going to come round. Now on an angle like this, if I'm a little bit worried it's going to tear down, I can always put a small, just a tiny little cut underneath, just to stop it stripping, the bark stripping down the tree. And that's why we did that on those other ones where we were taking the weight off first, because we don't want the bark to strip right down the tree and create somewhere where infection can get in and things like that. Right, and what we're going to do now is, you'll be able to see once I'm through this, the angle that you should be coming at these with. So we're trying to leave a little collar, and you'll notice that kind of will create a bit of a triangle with the ridge there. So you'll see there's a little, almost like a ridge, and it creates a triangle like that. If it's too narrow, you've cut it too deep. If it's too wide, it's not the end of the world, but it will look like a little fairy platform, and it's probably not the most desirable thing. So that sort of angle to, that sort of angle is okay. Like that, you're starting to get to that fairy platform territory, and it doesn't look so great, but we'll still probably heal. Then we can see there's another one here where these two are touching. So what I would be tempted to do with this one is just take out this one here and let that take over. See that? So that's just stop the crossing. This one here seems like it's, although it could be quite a good fruit bearing one, it's rubbing on this stake. So what I would tend to do is go, that's probably going to bear some nice fruit. So I will take the weight off here first, and then I will put my cut in. And I'm cutting just above a bud or a branch union all the time, so that there's no significant dieback that's going to introduce the chance of rot and things like that. And then I can start when I'm getting to this stage where a bit of dead's there, damaged, so it's kind of snapped and healed, but it's all gone a bit weird, so I'm going to take that off. And then I can then, let's imagine I've gone around and done that for the whole tree, I can then start reducing my tips. Now what I'm doing now is I'm going to try and find on the tips, and I'll come, perhaps here would be the easiest place. I'm finding, going along, and I'm looking for the first place where it kind of collars up, where I get a collar. You see there's a natural collar here, but actually I think last year's growth was collared there. So this didn't grow very much last year, just that tiny little bit. However, we're going to treat it as though it, because we can go back a couple of years, there's still plenty of buds on here. So we're going to treat it as though the whole last year's growth is that. To this little collar where it just sort of looks like someone has kind of wrapped round string or something almost. So we go there and we go, I'm going to take up to a third of that, a quarter to a third. So if I go, that's about halfway, about there. I'll try and prune to an outward facing bud if I can, but it's not the end of the world. Main reason we try and go for a bud pointing outwards is so that we're not encouraging growth into the tree. If I prune to a bud which was going that way, it could grow into the tree, and that's really the main point. Watching all the time where my hands are, where that is, and I'm just cutting with that slight slanted angle. So I'm not cutting into the tip of the bud, I'm not cutting into the back of the bud, and it's a little, water can run off, it will naturally die back to that point anyway. That's one tip done, and that's me taking off a quarter or a third of the current year's growth. I then go to my next one. That's very little growth there, so I'm just giving that a tiny little trim. This one here, its collar's about here, so I'm going to take off about a quarter there. Some of these varieties you can definitely, if you see they've put on a lot of growth in the last year, definitely take a third off these tips. If you see they've not done much, take a quarter. So I know that a third and a quarter don't really fit in fractions, but it's kind of how we would work it. You see this one hasn't put on a lot, that's last year's growth. There where my hand is, so that's the tip. So I'm just going to take off a few buds there. And that's that there. With little branches like this, we leave them if we can, unless it's really crowded. So you see these tiny little bits, because they're creating little clusters for fruit. So we actually want to encourage that. So for instance, that one which has got very little value as far as the structure of the tree, we've got other things which are going to grow in this space and it's going off and potentially going to cause problems. what we can do is actually cut this back into old wood, just there. And you'll notice it's not really that slanted, it's almost square on that. And the reason for that is now we're creating a little cluster for fruiting buds there. And I can even see a few there. Remember, fruiting buds are more swollen than leaf buds. So they're those big, thick, swollen buds. So that's what we're doing there. And then we would just go through and finish off the tips here. If there's like a sort of what I call like a crow's claw or chicken's foot there, where you've got multiple ones on the end of a tip, I would take at least one of them out, usually the center one. And then I think that's okay to leave those two there. But if I wanted to, I could reduce one a bit and leave that to keep shooting a bit more. Got that tip there that I've already cut. Then that tip there, just taking a few buds off, angled cut. And then I've just got that one there, I think. Oh. Yeah. And also sometimes when we're reducing the length of these branches, we're actually doing ourselves a favour when it's laden with fruit, because sometimes when you pull these branches and they have a long tip on, they will flex down quite far. But when you take a bit of the growth off, they start to become more rigid. So this one, which flexed down past the wire before, now that I've cut this, it's kind of staying about there when it's laden, which is ideal. So we're going to be winning there. As with before, it was, I don't want to force it too much, but it was bending right down. And yeah, and you just work your way round the tree doing that tip work. Then we get to the leader. This is the scary bit, okay?